So welcome to another episode of the Rediscovery channel, where each week one of us tells the other a story that they may or may not have heard of. And this week it's my turn. And Ivor, how much do you know about the Crimean War?
I don't really know anything other than the name. I've heard that I thought it was between like Russia and the Tatars, but I don't really know. Yeah, you got to tell me.
Yeah, so let me start off actually with a poem. And I'm talking about a war here that went on between 1853 and 1856. So I'm not talking about the war that recently happened between Russia and Ukraine. I'm talking about a war between Russia on the one hand side and then the Ottoman Empire on the other side that was backed by France, the UK, and Sardinia. And I want to start off with a poem that came from this.
What's the time period for the war?
1853 till 1856.
Okay.
Yeah, so just around your Civil War, just before, I would say. And here's a poem called, it's part of it from the Charge of the Light Brigade. And that's a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson at the Battle of Balaclava. And it's one of the most famous war poems, and it had an influence on the outcome of the war. And I actually have some sounds as well that I'll include in the video because it was recorded in 1880, so on an Edison. So it's one of the oldest recording, although there are also recordings now from the 1850s by a French inventor that beat Edison to it 20 years before he did. Anyway, to the poem. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honor the charge they made. Honor the Light Brigade, noble 600. So I chose to talk about this poem because the Charge of the Light Brigade is a battle that happened, and it's kind of symbolic for the war that took place, because I want to go a little bit more deeper into the background of the war, but the war was the first industrial war. As in, people had like railway roads, telegrams, but they also had like modern weapons, including like cannons with shells, explosive shells. And they also had weaponry like the minier ball, which is a French invention, apparently. But basically, it's just a hollow point.
Yeah, I've heard of the Manet ball. Actually, it was used during the Civil War on both sides. And that's one reason why so many guys in the Civil War lost their arms and legs, because that thing would go through and always like shatter. Like if it hit a bone, the bone would get shattered and it would leave like a gaping exit wound, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and before they would just use lead balls that would mostly just go straight through, or you'd get stuck in, and these would like disintegrate and tear and create massive bullet holes. Yeah. So yeah, it's one of the first industrial wars, and the reason that this poem was made. So there was this Light Brigade, at some point during the war. It was still early in the war. And it was 670 artillery. So, like, I think a lot of them were noblemen or just below noblemen, English noblemen on a horse, versus, I think it was like 50 Russian artillery guns. with explosive shells, and they were going like they were giving the signal, and they mistook it to like, oh, we need to go take the guns, but they actually meant different guns. So they just like, all right, well, order's an order. So they charged head front into the enemy guns, and the guns just tore through them. And like afterwards, like there were like 335 horses were killed in action, and 156 people, and then a lot of them were taken prisoner. But it was just a slaughter fest. So it was kind of like old world meets new world, where you send out your cavalry, kind of like if you're playing those strategy games and your opponent has already leveled up to machine guns, kind of, and all you have is cavalry, and you decide to attack. It usually doesn't end well for you.
Yeah, actually, yeah, like in Age of Empires, I used to do that. I would send like a cavalry charge at the archers who are kind of like weak and have less armor. Like if you can get to them, if they're not behind something, then they get pretty jacked up. But
yeah. So this war wasn't won by battle tactics as much as it was won by like the technology used and the kind of war machine you had, like the amount of weapons you could produce, etc. So it was a battle. They had battles in trenches, and the total death toll is estimated by some to be as high as 750,000 people. And it kind of set the scene of like what people could expect later on, in the First World War, because then they added the machine gun to it as well, and then it was just like a meat grinder for pretty much.
Yeah, I heard they tried to do that again during World War I. There was somewhere in France where they sent like a cavalry charge against the Germans, and they just got blown to shreds by the machine guns. And they also had some guys wearing bright colored costumes designed to be eye-catching. I think those guys were short-lived as well.
Yeah. So this is what happened to these guys, but yeah, nowadays you think about how they did the war recently with the Ukraine, and how the port came, Sevastopol, the city, came into Russian hands, and some of the reasons behind the war are similar to them nowadays. It was all about access to warm water. And the English felt threatened by this, but it was also because of economic trade. So the English and the French had a lot of trade agreements with the Ottomans, and the Ottoman Empire was starting to crumble. It was turning into the sick man of Europe. And Tsar Nicholas, he saw this as an opportunity to increase Russian influence in the region. And also to protect Orthodox minorities. Actually, Greece had only been independent for about 20 years. Just one example, but large parts of Eastern Europe were still under Ottoman rule. And his intention was to potentially retake Constantinople. And we've talked about that before, about how strategic it is because of access to the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. But he was also interested in potentially taking Jerusalem. So yeah, he saw it as his holy duty to look after the Orthodox minorities who were living under the yoke of Ottoman, jizya rule, with the minority tax, or the people of the books tax, and that were also facing all kinds of discrimination.
I'm sorry, were the Ottomans still really, I know they had their Janissary program, but were they still at this time collecting the jizya tax?
They were, but actually an outcome of the war was that a lot of countries in Eastern Europe the Christians there gained much more independence, or de facto independence. So that was an outcome of this war, actually, that they were no longer controlled as much by the Ottomans. So yeah, But the reason that the English and the French and Sardinia was also involved because they were hoping to gain favor from the French and the English, because they were fighting, or they were, what do you call it, vying with the Austrians. So it was just all realpolitik, right? That's what you call in German, is the term for it. Basically, it just means realistic politics, or it's just based on a pragmatic kind of approach to politics.
No principles, in other words.
Yeah, no principles, exactly. So the Turks were severely crushed in a naval defeat of Sinope. And that was the largest defeat they faced since the Battle of Lepanto, which we talked about before when we talked about the Knights of Malta. During this fighting, 37 Russians were killed and 229 wounded. 3 ships were damaged on their side. And then but one of the Ottoman ships were destroyed, and about 3,000 men were killed, and 150 were taken prisoner, as well as their leader, Osman Pasha, was captured. And part of that was just tactics, but the main reason was that the Russians were using new kinds of guns with explosive shells against wooden ships. So it was just, one giant explosive happening, really. So yeah, and because the defeat was so severe, then the French and the English and even the Austrians considered declaring war on Russia. In the end, it was just the French and the English. And also, apparently, the Tsar had at one point insulted Napoleon III. So that was also a reason. So that's a good reason to start a war, always, So this is so there we had this war. So 1854 is the year we're in now, and then they decided to attack the main Russian naval base, Sevastopol, on the Crimean Peninsula. So that's the one that was recently reunited with Russia, and that's where the French and the English landed. And what followed was just a brutal war of attack and counterattack, and it was really a war of attrition with lots of lives lost. It was very expensive on both sides, and finally Sevastopol fell after a French assault. That they
you cut out. You said finally Sevastopol fell.
Yeah, so finally Sevastopol fell, and then there was a peace treaty because France and Britain were also really tired of the war at home. And then the Treaty of Paris, signed in March 30th, 1856, ended the war, and that made it illegal for Russian warships to be in the Black Sea. And then the Ottoman vassal states of Wallachia, Moldavia became largely independent. And Christian there gained a degree of official equality, and the Orthodox Church regained control of the Christian churches in dispute. So that was an outcome. It also had a severe impact on the Russian Empire, though. The war really weakened the military. The treasury was empty. Russia's influence in Europe was gone. And Russia would just take decades to recover. It was a huge humiliation. And it started a time of modernization and societal change in Russia. So it's to some extent, this also laid the foundation of the later revolution over there. Yeah. Well, they also saw some rapid modernization of the country as the sole way to recover the status of becoming a European power again. So they became reforming all the institutions, and they also abolished serfdom in 1856 or around that time. and they started to like look at different types of judicial reforms, etc. So yeah, that
I
was
did hear. Mhm.
it was a war you don't know much about. Oh, and one interesting thing about how it was not very popular at home in England, people were not happy at all either. And the charge of the Light Brigade, people heard about the slaughter there. It was very expensive, lots of people killed. And then on Sunday, January 21st, 1855, a snowball riot occurred in Trafalgar Square, in which 1,500 people gathered to protest against the war by pelting buses, cabs, and pedestrians with snowballs. When the police intervened, the snowballs were directed at the officers. And then the riot was finally put down by troops and police acting with truncheons.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how so many wars in the past, like they would tell people that, hey, this group over here is the enemy. They're so bad, look at what they do. And they would make, posters and everything about it. And guys would just go. And I think for a long time, guys want to go to war because maybe I think a mixture of patriotism, but also like to increase their market value with the opposite sex. Like if you get a scratch or a wound or something which doesn't debilitate you but is kind of obvious, then you can be like, yeah, I went to the war and I got this killing all these people. But it seems like this kind of war, even back then, it'd be a hard sell. Like today, it's harder for them to hide stuff from us because if they start some war with some nonsense country, then footage is going to be all over the internet of what's really happening. But back then, that wasn't the case. But I imagine they'd have a hard time building a case with the common man for why you should go and defend the Ottomans. Because, like, if it'd be me, they'd be like, "Oh, you lot, we're recruiting to go and fight against the Russians." I'd say, "Oh, why?" "Well, they're killing the Ottomans." I'd be like, "Oh, well, so?"
Yeah.
How's that a problem? Tell me again. They must have really been peddling some lies, like, oh, the Russians are so savage. Oh, the Russians this. Oh, the Russians that. And then
they had war propaganda, which must have been. That was already the case then, where they made the Russians to be savage for sure.
But then you'd think as soon as they say, well, we're going to be fighting on the side of the Ottomans, guys would be like,
Yeah, but they also had a lot of romantic ideas about the Ottomans. It was like they had all these paintings at the time where you'd see like the Sultan with his harem, and they would be eating Turkish candy, and they would have like the Ottomans in their homes, and the carpets. There was a time that it was very trendy to look at the Ottoman. It was very exotic, So yeah, I'm not sure how the common guy at that time thought about it. It must have been strange. Like, which one do you? I think the Russians were others because they were Orthodox, so they were definitely others.
Well, so is Islam then.
Yeah. So I wonder how big a role that would have played at that time still, because and even the English and the French being allies together, like they've also been arch enemies.
100 Years' War.
Yeah. So yeah, it must have been strange. And on the one hand, there were, like with the First World War, there were so many volunteers and people were excited to go to war. There must have been a lot of propaganda behind it and people buying into it just because that's all they heard. But
yeah, like there's the once a German, always a German poster. And they would just say stuff like, oh, the Germans are piercing babies over their bayonets.
Yeah.
Like, look, you don't want this to happen.
And they also started calling they started calling the Germans the Huns.
Yeah.
Which makes no sense whatsoever, because it's a completely different ethnic group. The Huns are Asians.
There's absolutely no common ground between Germans and Huns.
Yeah.
Except that they were both invading barbarians at one time. Other than that, there's not really anything.
And then again, so were the English, if they were honest, right?
Hey, the English are civilized invaders, not barbaric invaders.
Yeah, yeah. Ask an Irish person that and see how they feel about that, or somebody in Wales. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, no, a lot of people have legitimate grievances against the English. Like, I had a long talk with this Indian guy one time, and he was like a really patriotic dude for his country, very sensible dude, I must say. And one of the but then what he said to me, like, the English did nothing good for India, and they looted it and everything. And I was like, well, they did make trains. And he's like, yeah, they made trains so they could carry away all the treasure more easily to the coast. And I was like, okay, I'm sure they probably did do. I mean, I know they
probably not. It's probably not that black and white, I imagine. I'm sure England has done some good things for India as well when it comes to education, for example. But
yeah, they did. They did do some good things, but they also did kind of help themselves to things as well. Like we talked about it in the Indus Valley video where they took the bricks from that site to make something else. And I actually think English are one of the more benign conquerors compared with some other groups. Like,
yeah, I don't know how they compare to the Russians. I think that would be a good comparison for this video.
Gotta ask the Siberian natives about that.
Yeah, or the Tatars, or the Ukrainians, I guess. Who else? Well, that was when Stalin was in power. So
yeah, I don't think you can
a lot of
that.
a lot of harm was done by the Russians during the Soviet rule. So I don't know if that should count.
No, it doesn't, because communism is not the indigenous culture, so you can't count it. Communism turns any country into a nightmare hellscape with brutality. Doesn't matter what civilization it is, there's going to be oppression and destruction. So you can't judge the culture by what they're doing, by what happens under
No,
a
I
communist
mean a
regime.
lot of stuff. Most of it was just Stalin, really. So a lot of the worst, anyway.
Yeah, and I think even under Stalin, the kind of nomadic Siberian people were, I could be wrong, but I think they were still left alone for the most part. But then they don't have anything really to take anyways.
You
So
probably didn't see them as a threat. Any people he saw as a threat, he would just move them to a different part of the empire.
or kill them.
Yeah. Yeah, man. But that was my story. So the Crimean War, the war that started modern wars, and a war that was won by technology and brutality. At one point, the English actually considered using chemical weapons as well, which is interesting.
Why didn't they?
I think the commanders decided not to, that they weren't going to do it, or I don't know why, but but they were close. It was something they were already thinking of, which, again, premonition of what would happen just 50 years or 60 years later.
Yeah, like the Germans will use any weapon in their arsenal, but like actually in the Civil War here in the United States, they had gas, some types of gas that they were thinking about using. They considered using gas warfare to kill the other side, but then they decided it was unsporting and didn't do it.
Yeah.
Interesting, right? Because they use other things like the Anaconda Plan, which caused everybody in the South to starve to death, including the women and the Union prisoners that were taken, and the slaves that they were ostensibly trying to free. But then they said that the gas was unsporting.
Yeah, it's the same thing when there was a boycott on Iraq. There were also women and children dying from hunger. And the same is happening right now in Yemen. There's a boycott of Yemen. And, like innocent people are dying from hunger or because they don't have medicine. Mm. And that is being done by, the free leaders of the world, etc. So, it's amazing what people will do if they think they can get away with it. for sure.
anything.
Yeah. Anyway, I saw an interesting video, by the way, about Japan being close to having a nuclear weapon as well. They were developing one. I knew the Germans were.
Yeah, they were working together during World War II to develop.
No, actually, it's what I understood. It was actually the Navy and the military in Japan, because they hated each other. They were working separately from each other on developing a bomb.
Each other.
There was this rivalry.
Why?
I don't know. I'm not that much. I don't know that much. Maybe it's a good one for. That would be a good video topic. Why the Japanese Navy and military hated each other.
I wonder if it's some cultural bias against particular types of combat.
Who knows? Yeah.
Because that was a thing in some parts of the world, some cultures, like some types of killing were, prestigious, and other types were considered not so much, like a little bit disgraceful.
Yeah. Could be. I don't know. Would be a good one to look into. But
Sure.
Yeah, and that was my story about the Crimean War. So if there are any comments or likes, please let us know. Any requests, please let us know. It's been kind of quiet. We hope you enjoyed these videos. But if there are no other questions, I think we should close this one out and say see you guys in the next one. Anything from
No, that's a good topic. I would just add, as always, if you like our content, do share, and also leave us a comment. At this point, we are taking requests, and so far we've done a video on every request. So if you leave us a request, there's a very good chance that we'll do something on it. And that's all I got.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Cheers.